All right. Well, Daryl, welcome to the podcast. Really appreciate you taking time to come and visit with me. And so, Daryl, you and I met, roughly I want to say it's 3.5 years ago, with you being a general manager, wearing so many hats. And so, like to introduce you, it's like I'm going to have this crazy wild title from
Just Daryl. That's
from,
easy.
from
Just Daryl.
entrepreneur to business coach, business strategist, to leadership training, to COO, to CFO, licensed real estate broker. The list could go on and on, but the label that I like to give Daryl is friend. And
Thank
Daryl
you.
got me through some crazy times when COVID came in, and I'm trying to run a real estate office, which I've never done before. And 6 months later, I find out COVID comes, flips the real estate world a little bit on its head. And Daryl was a guiding force for me to kind of get through that time, and kind of became a mentor to me at that particular time. And Daryl's got some really cool stuff that's started here last fall. Ran into him, and so I'm so excited to bring him in. So Daryl, I think the best place for us to really start. You're from Canada. I know
Yes,
that
sir.
much about you, but I'll be honest. There's parts of you, even though we've had a lot of long conversations, kind of how you got started from moving from Canada to the U.S. and then kind of starting, being a business owner. I would really like for you to take a few minutes and take us back to that time, because I think there's so much credibility that you gain for what you're doing today, which we'll get into. But could you kind of take us back from like when you first started and got into business?
Well, first of all, you're too kind. I love all the scramble of words and job titles, which I've always never really believed in job titles. I think you know that. It's just what you do. Friend, right back at you. I appreciate that. Probably the best title you can have, right? So you're too kind. Thanks, Jeff. Basically, I was born and raised the son of a Mountie up in Canada, the RCMP. In the States, everybody sees that Dudley Do-Right image, the big hat and the big pants, the red serge, that's their dress up uniform. Well, that guy, so if you hear the Canadian accent in me, that's why. You'll definitely pick up on some of it as we go today. But that guy, my dad, had always taught me that if I wanted something, I'd have to earn it. So it led me to starting my first business when I was only 15 years old. And you look back at those times and go, talk about just a wing and a prayer, and you just start a company, right? So, but started my first business when I was 15, and then I eventually got married. I kind of moved up the chain, got into retail sales and then wholesale sales, and I was basically managing Central Canada for a large international company, and they wanted to move me to a big city. And I was from a small town, and I was like, that's not going to work for me. So that led me to moving down to the United States. Into a small company. So I was with that small company for about a dozen odd years, but I worked my way from the janitor and chief bottle washer, basically of this company, through every seat in the company to eventually buying it. And along the way, discovered that my true passion was for coaching and helping people. And I was a part of a program called the Strategic Coach, which is an international entrepreneurial coaching organization. And they help you identify something called your unique ability, which we can get into a separate time. But my UA statement is to positively impact people's lives with a belief that the future will always be bigger than the past. And so that led me to starting a coaching company about 20 years ago. It was always kind of my hobby. So I eventually sold that business that I bought and was going to get into coaching, but had young kids at home and thought I kind of needed to, be more grounded than that. So I got involved with some startups. One startup that actually led me to being president of 7 companies at the same time. That's the many hats you were talking about. And discovered through EOS that I was sitting in 14 seats all at the same time and wondering why I was going crazy. And through EOS, not only did it help me to realize what the better way was, but it also led to me leaving those companies and actually getting into my coaching full time. And I now get to do what I have always loved to do through the tools of EOS, because it literally changed my life. And I want to use these tools to change as many people's lives as I can along the way. So
Yeah, Daryl,
that's my story.
you alluded to EOS, and so there's probably some people here that are going, what is EOS? And so
Sure.
the entrepreneurial operating system. And so I got introduced to this a couple years ago. went down to Florida with my boss, and we sat through it, and it was so eye-opening, and it really changed the way that
Yeah.
I looked at business. I'm gonna go back just a few years when you and I were working together. One of the things that will always stand out to me, and I've believed this to be true, and I've experienced it. When I would go into your office, the first thing that I noticed the very first time that I went in, I was surrounded by books, and not just books, because anyone can go in and stack them around. But typically, when I go into someone's environment and there's a lot of books, it doesn't necessarily mean they're the smartest guy in the room, but they're very open to other ideas and concepts and those types of things, which make them extremely valuable and dangerous because they're so good. And one thing that I really remember with you is not only were the books there, but I knew you read them because you would go, "Hey, have you ever read this book?" You would reach over and grab it. And this didn't happen just once. There was several, but you would know the concepts
Yeah.
and the things involved in it like the back of your hand, and you could speak to it. And so now you're coaching, basically how do you run a business, and all of those things that you had done in the past totally set you up and make you so good at what you do. And this really is the seat that you should be in for sure.
Well, thank you again.
But going back to that, when we would have these talks, your ability to read and retain, um, it was extraordinary. And so just to kind of set the table for some of that, and I want to get back to a little bit of your personal life, because you are a husband and a father too. But we would sit in a room, and like you said, you were wearing a lot of hats. So there'd be several people in the room that basically were all kind of reporting up to Daryl, and you'd have to go through with each one of us. And when we do the 5 dysfunctions of a family, all of those types of things. And so it opened my eyes and introduced me to some books that I maybe wouldn't have read or found as much value in. And now I read them, and quite frankly, I look at it in a different perspective because of the fact that you could take those concepts and memorize them and utilize them, not just in business, but even in life. And so you've changed the way that I read books and the way that I try to understand them and use them. And so I appreciate that. But Daryl, let's talk about, you're more than just a business strategist, a business coach, a leader, all those types of things. You're also a husband. You're also a father.
Yeah.
So, and quite frankly, we didn't even say like where are you located? So give us a little bit about your personal life.
Sure. So I'm in North Dakota, Minnesota area. I was one of those guys like the Taylor Swift song, never ever ever. I was like ever. I was never going to get divorced. I truly was one and done, and absolutely believed in marriage, and that I had 2 kids. We had 2 kids that were growing up, and life was changing around us, and I just believed that we would figure it out. Until we didn't. And so that was really hard. The reality of my belief system was shattered, that it was, I'm never, ever, ever going to be divorced, until all of a sudden that was really like, it got to a point where it's like, I just can't live like this anymore. And so after that, and I took some time to heal from that, I knew, again, the Taylor Swift song, like never was I going to get remarried, until I met my now wife, Sherry. And I literally didn't know that this is how life could be. So I'm very extremely grateful for the pain, because you learn through pain. You learn through your trials and challenges, I believe. You learn more through your difficulties than you do through your successes, because your successes usually rest in your ego. Oh yeah, this is how good I am. Look at how good I am. Whereas your failures, you really have to, you can take one of 2 paths. You can either blame everybody else for it, which is all, narcissistic, or you can go internal and go, okay, hang on a second. What can I learn from this? Maybe this is me. Hang on a second. It probably was me. So that you really learn how to get better. Well, now I'm very, very grateful to say that I went from 2 to 5 children. 5 kids are all grown up. But I went from a boy and a girl to a boy and 4 girls. In my life, and so I am a T Swizzle fan. I watch the movie. We listen to Taylor all the time, because that's what you do when you got 4 girls plus your wife, 5 females in the house. But I truly, my first piece of advice is wherever anybody who's listening to this is in your journey, you really have to understand that the future is yours to make. So whatever you have going on and however difficult you believe your life is and whatever challenges you have, because I go back through my journal and there were times where I literally wrote that I'd much rather just go stand in front of a truck than go through the pain that I was going through in my divorce. And of course, I never actually thought that, but your brain goes on supercharged mode when you're not happy, right? And so it was the future that I didn't see that I had to have faith in that ended up being so much better than anything that I had to that point. Could you imagine if I would have just given up, right? I've got a sign on my desk. I don't know if you can see this, but it says never give up. No, you can't really see. Never give up, ever. And it's amazing how quickly people use their challenges in life to go, you know what, this isn't for me, and you give up. And then that's what you hang on to, is that you give up, as opposed to, hey, I'm going to pivot because there's a bigger future for me somewhere. Does that make sense? Yeah. So my wife, I call her my new wife because we've only been married not quite a year. She hates it when I call her that, so of course I have to call her that. But I think I run out of that as of May on our first anniversary. I can't say new anymore. It'll be the year. But just happier than I've ever been.
You know, and you brought up a point, and we talked about you don't have to be the smartest guy in the room, but what makes someone smart? Experience, and watching someone learn from a mistake versus repeating it over and over again tells me that someone's got some intelligence or not. But you said something, and you and I talked maybe a month ago, and this topic came up, and you had mentioned, you know, when you start to look internally and say, is this on me, or is this on someone else? And that voice inside of our head starts to tell us a lot of lies.
Yes.
Starts to tell us things that if we believe in, and there's no voice that we hear more often than the one that's in between our ears. And you and I, this is what we talked about. We said, isn't it interesting where someone that's a coach that goes out, finds people that have similar issues, they're struggling with things, they're having that voice in their head that's telling them all the negativity, and you can basically say, hey, stop listening to that, it's a lie, and walk them down a different path. Yet the person that's the coach is dealing with the exact same issue.
Yeah.
So with that being said, what do you do then as a coach and someone that most people come to you for those types of things? I mean, you're kind of a counselor to a degree too, especially with what you're doing today and in the past. Who do you rely on, or where do you go for that?
So I've got my own coaches, and I have for years. You know, I don't know if you watch Darren Hardy or not still, his Darren Dailies, but I would recommend that too. Realize that anybody that offers you anything for free is doing it to get in your head to hopefully sell you something. So Darren's like, no, he's like, he honestly, he's a great guy. He has a real estate background. He's from California. He's written a bunch of great books. But he has a free 5 days a week video that he sends out, usually 3 to 5 minutes long. But he does do some selling in there. So as long as you're aware of that, you can still take some of the really good nuggets if you don't want the sale. You can take some really good nuggets. And I think one of the big things for me is that if you go back to, you know, some of the books, you know, How to Win Friends and Influence People and The Richest Man in Babylon, and like books that were written back in the 20s and 30s and 40s. And it's so relevant to today that you have to have somebody with wisdom around you that is going to give you guidance. And so we went through a phase, I think, in the 80s and 90s where it was therapy or therapists. And that got such a huge negative connotation that now it's kind of wrapped itself around that, like, well, what do you mean you don't have a therapist? Well, I just substituted the word coach. You know, Gino Wickman, who's the founder of EOS, he talks about how literally the therapist that he went to saved his life when he was younger, when he was going through his struggles. And so he very openly talks about, you know, I had therapists. Well, you know, therapist, coach, coaches, it's all in the same realm. It's, I have a problem, will you listen to me? And how do I solve this problem? And it is amazing how when you articulate your problem out loud, your problem becomes much more manageable than the voice in your head that is just screaming at you how bad this problem is. If you just slow down and actually talk about what it is, get it out on a piece of paper, the first thing you're going to realize is, well, I guess this isn't as bad as I thought. And then you can figure out action steps, right? But I've always had coaches, still do. In fact, my coach right now spends half her time in Italy and half her time in California. So it's great when I talk to her in Italy. We usually talk at 7 or 8 o'clock her time, which is only like noon my time. And sometimes we get going and we spend a half-hour conversation becomes 2.5 hours, and it's awesome. So I would recommend me. This is certainly not self-plugging, but hey, you can certainly reach out to me. But I would recommend to everybody in going through business, going through life, have a coach of some degree. Because you think back to sports when you were in high school, you think back in college, you think back any time you had a coach that made you a better person in whatever it is you were learning about. Well, we all need to have somebody who's going to help us with our head, because there's way too many things that distract us today. It's insane. So everybody should invest in themselves. And that was my point about Darren Hardy. Goes back to pre-1900s. Invest 10% of your earnings in yourself, always, and you'll get exponential returns as you grow. So,
yeah, I think to a degree, and I don't like to use the word master and art or those types of things, but a lot of your success that you've had through your entire career with all the different things that you've been in is your ability to help people to find their solution on their own, to self-solve their problem. And you just hit it right on the head, where it was like, articulate your problem, let's talk through it. And next thing you know, somebody goes, well, they think that you did it, but it literally was a conversation, but you're willing to listen. And I'll say this jokingly, but if you would go to talk to Daryl and you say, hey, I just want a 15-minute I want a 5-minute conversation, it'll be 15 minutes. If you want a 30-minute conversation, it'll be 30 minutes. Daryl's, no matter what you had going on, there was times where I was like, okay, I know that he's busy, but you would be willing to basically stop, regardless of all the chaos going around you and the pressure, the timelines. I think back of like, trying to get COVID wrapped around, and then set up the budget, and then propose everything, and all those types of things, a lot of writing and everything going on. With all that stuff happening, if there was an issue that had to be solved, you would stop and you would give undivided attention. And that's so rare today for someone to say, hey, I'm gonna give you undivided attention. The phone buzzes, someone looks over at it. Oh, maybe this is more important. You're like, well, I thought we were having a conversation. Now maybe the phone is more important. And I really respected that. And that also made me very aware as well. It's like, when you're in that moment and someone has a problem, if you give them the undivided attention, that conversation will be over much sooner than if you're not giving them your full attention and asking the appropriate.
Well, I will tell you, thank you. That certainly did not come natural to me. I'll tell you, you learn from your mistakes. Holy crap, did I spend a lot of years sucking at that, Jeff. So I still don't believe that I'm anywhere near being masterful at that, but I'm making progress. But I will tell you, turning the table, since you've embarrassed the crap out of me so far in this call, people need to know a little bit about Jeff. Jeff came into the role that he was at. As he said, he had never been in a real estate company before, but had the role not changed under you, Jeff, from what it was that we hired you for to what it became, you were one of the best connectors with people that I've ever met. You literally would be under all kinds of stress and pressure of what you knew you needed to get done, and yet you would literally stop everything and say, absolutely, I'll go for a beer with you. So you would connect with the struggles that the agents at the company had and the staff that the company had in a way that I've not seen anybody before you or after you that did it. And if not for the role changing, which had nothing to do with you, you would have been absolutely the best that we've ever had in that role because of your ability to connect with people. And so I appreciate you saying with me for a 5-minute conversation or 30-minute conversation, you would literally, and there's stories, guys, where his conversation wasn't solving the issue that this one person would have. And then all of a sudden he'd be like, hey, we can go, we'll have beers, we'll go sit in the hot tub, we'll talk about it. And it would turn into a 4 or 5 hour long conversation. And people would find out that you're actually having these conversations and they would all come over and join you. So Jeff, you'd be helping one person and you'd be helping 15 people at the same time. And while you're thinking that I just had them over and we were talking, and, we had a beer in the hot tub, all I would hear is holy crap, like Jeff, like it totally changed how I looked at my problem or my issue or what I was doing or whatever. It was so great. We're telling people now when we go over to Jeff's, so everybody all comes over, and it wasn't to have a party. It was to transform their challenges and their problems. And that was a way that you connected that I want your listeners to make sure that you know was masterful, Jeff. Masterful. I don't have that skill.
Well, I appreciate the kind words, and I will say it was an interesting time, and some of those things come natural, and I didn't recognize some of those abilities that I had until someone pointed it out and said, you had like 15, 20 real estate agents come over to your house
Yeah.
for like hours, and I'm like,
Well, and you didn't rise to the occasion, Jeff. You were already there. I think that you just took it as for granted. Well, this is who I am, so absolutely I'll help you. And what the people around you saw was, holy crap, we've never had this kind of support before. So you didn't rise to that. That was who you were. And I commend you like from the bottom of my heart for that, man. I've always said that.
well, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I know one thing, and I'll put this out there. This will be a part one of part two because Daryl, there's so much for us to talk about. What I want to do, but what I would like to talk about now, for here for a while, and maybe we'll hop into another conversation here, maybe even this morning yet, because I'd like to dive a little deeper into the enterprise operating system because I think that there's some people out there that probably need to hear it. And I'd also like you to be an advocate for your own business because I think that, I've ran into some EOS coaches in the last several months. I know from just conversation that they don't have the credentials. One part of it due to their age, not their problem or their fault, just a lack of experiences, and it's just a lack of being a business owner, facing the challenges you have. And so what you bring to the table, I don't care if you live in Fargo, I don't care if you live in Omaha, I don't care if you live in San Diego. If you've got a good business strategist and business coach, they don't need to be in your office.
Right.
They need to be in your head and helping you. And so I want to get to that. But more importantly, you recently told me that you had authored a book, and we haven't talked about this for probably 6 weeks. Maybe this is falling flat. Maybe this is going somewhere, but I'm really curious to know because I've always been intrigued to write one, but you've actually done it now. Tell us a little bit about the book, and then just where it's at.
Well, yes, I have written it, and I sent my manuscript. I'm working with my publisher, and I will tell you, I very much have an appreciation for why, when you're working with a publishing company to help you to do this, why it takes so long. It is amazing the skill set that they have to take the crap that we write about and go, well, what do you mean by this? Or we're going to take this, chapter 8, we're going to take about 90% of the words out because it really means nothing. So what are you trying to get to? I'm like, you just took my whole story away. Yeah, but you got to say that in a way that's going to, resonate. I'm like, so you kind of sit here like this. Oh my God, I suck. I have a whole newfound appreciation for publishers. So I just finished 3 more chapters this week. We're tweaking and changing. Our timeline was going to be the end of June, which was self-imposed. I think with all the stuff that I'm learning now, I'm realizing that this might actually come out a little bit later than June, because the book is going to be called The Easy Button, and really truly the concept behind this is trying to articulate what you learn along your journey in a way that you can help other people. But the challenge is everybody learns things in different ways and reads words differently. And so you end up, and we do this all the time in life, right? And to the other, we're called EOS implementers. To the other EOSIs you're talking about with different experience and stuff, I think the value that the group brings is that everybody is at wherever they are in their stage in business. So are our coaches. So one of the things I love about our community is that you might meet with somebody that goes, yeah, you're too young or you don't have enough experience or you don't have whatever, but they may bring a talent that is exactly what your organization needs. And if they don't, we interact all the time. So it's like, hey, I met with these people, great people. They think I suck, but maybe you can help them. We are all about help first. And so taking that mentality into writing a book, I know exactly what I'm trying to get across, but writing it in a way that people will read and get is way different. Because you're not just talking to somebody on the phone, and when they say I don't understand, you can't pivot and help them to understand. When you write a book, you got to do it in such a way that it makes sense, and that's a little hard. That's much harder than I thought, Jeff. So manuscript is done, first round of editing is done. I understand now why it takes, they say it's 6 months to a year to get a book done. And you can self-publish real easy on Amazon. But I can totally understand now why my mentality is I want to help people. Well, if you want to help people, you need to make this better. So God bless my publisher.
You think, well, I write the book, I get it, so why wouldn't everybody else get it? They're like, I have no idea what you wrote.
And literally, I'll look at stuff and I go, this makes perfect sense to me. And they go, that's great. But unless you're in your head, this is gobbledygook. I'm like, oh, okay, I'll try again. So it's great. It's a great learning experience.
Dale, you told me something else, and I went online and I validated this. But we were talking about being a New York bestseller.
Yeah.
And you said you learned something inside of that. And apparently there in certain circles, this is probably pretty common knowledge, but I had never heard of this. And I've told a few people and they were like, what? And so you told me what you can do to become an instant New York bestseller.
Yeah. So it's all marketing, right? So when you really think about this, what are we digesting? Between media, between book, like how do books get on the front shelf at the airport? Like how do they get front exposure? How do they get promoted? How does all this happen? So I am. If anybody in your group has heard of Kolbe, Kolbe, Kolbe. I became a certified Kolbe coach about 15 years ago. Oh God, it might be more now. Sorry, it's been a while. Because I loved it because it really helps to identify what your natural tendencies are. And one of my natural tendencies is I'm a fact finder, so I go looking for facts. So I had done some research, and many, many, many years ago, it didn't cost a whole lot of money to pay for the marketing to a publishing company to get your book in all the right places. And as long as you could pay for it, you would basically become a New York Times bestseller. Because you're using a firm to get your book in the right places to get enough copies sold to be on the New York Times bestseller list. Well, the fee is much higher today than it was back 20 years ago when I first learned about this, but you can still do that. And it really, whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent, it goes to money talks, right? Which is why when you go to publish a book, if your goal to publish a book is become rich, you just don't write the book. Like you don't get rich writing a book. If your goal is you have a story to tell and you want other people to hear it, or you want to help people and you want to use this as a way to help people, or you want to validate some of the stuff that you've learned in your life and you want to be able to have a tool to put all these thoughts in one place, then go write your book. If along the way you end up becoming very successful, great. Well, there are people that have learned how to play that game that, well, I've got enough money to play the game up front to get my validation early. So how do I do that? Oh, there's a way. And you can be on the New York Times bestseller. And I that's not my goal. So I'm not going to spend that kind of money to be in the right places at the right time to do that. I'm doing this just to help people. But it's crazy.
It is. And, it's always been interesting. Like, how do these people just skyrocket to a New York bestseller? I'm like, I've never heard of you. You haven't really, like, maybe you wrote a few books, but now all of a sudden this particular book will blow your socks off. I read it and I go, didn't really, this wasn't an amazing eye opener. It was regurgitating some things that I had read before. And yet there it is, New York's bestsellers list. And I thought,
well, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry annually, and there's 10,000 books a day published right now.
Oh,
10,000 books a day. So when you think about that noise, how do you become the top 100 out of 10,000? Well, you got to deploy some pretty significant strategy there. So, yeah,
quite frank. And with AI today, writing a book will be an art that's somewhat forgotten, I believe, at some point, because you can take your concept and ask AI to create it, and probably to a certain standard, and it'll generate it for you.
And not to veer off, but real quick, your listeners, you got to be careful. AI, I use AI a lot, and I'll go validate things. I'm like, hey, rewrite this for me. Hey, make this sound better. Hey, how do I post this on LinkedIn? Well, some of the stuff that's being done there's over 28,000 AI programs available right now. 28,000 different AI products available right now and growing. So what a lot of people hear about is the Chat GPT, right? Because that's kind of the one that came out. Well, Microsoft just launched theirs. Apple's got theirs. There's a whole bunch of different ones. I think the biggest challenge is that you really got to be careful that so much of what's out there now is automatically generated. It's not true.
Right.
So be careful what you're validating, because just like all the algorithms, if anybody watched that movie, The Social Network, if I'm scrolling on a social media app and I happen to slow down on one picture, the algorithm realizes that I spent 0.1 of a second on everything else, but I spent 1 second on this picture, and it will change what I'm seeing. So it's the same thing with AI. If they start, as they're using this, if I read an article that may be taking me down a path, it recognizes I read it and it will feed me more of the same thing. It is insane. You cannot replace the power of a human. You never will, no matter how smart these computers get, because we have the ability to discern between right and wrong, or true and false, or at least be able to go, hang on a second, I have more questions. Whereas with the AI, it doesn't work that way.
Right. No emotional attachment
No.
to it. And so
Yeah.
it's only as good as what it's been
Right.
basically trained to do. So Daryl, what I want to do, like we said, I want to put this in two parts. So I like to do this in bite-sized chunks because people like me will listen to this for a half an hour, they get bored, they move on.
Yeah.
So let's do this. Let's go ahead and we'll end this one. If you got some time, I'd like to just go ahead and pick up a conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'll
Sure.
end this. Let's hop back into another Zoom. We'll just use the same link, and then I really want to kind of dive into your to the EOS because there's so much there. There's so
Love
much
to.
that I'm sure you could bring into that as well. So if you're cool with that, let's go ahead and do that. And
Okay.
I'll see you. To the listeners, we'll just listen to the next one, and we'll pick up our conversation from there.
Be right back.